come and buy the book here, we wanted to support Chaucer's.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we probably all agree that a independent bookstore like this is a fantastic, important cultural resource for the community. So thank you for all coming here to do this. What is this book, Making History, Making Blintzes? Do you mind if we read a little stuff from this? Okay.
Please.
Well, it'll be quick.
Will there be Blintzes served
There
at
will
the
not
end?
be Blintzes. However,
But there is a recipe in the book.
on page X,
X5. Oh, X.
there is actually a very world-class Blintz recipe for you. So
Oh, Blintz.
this book was not our idea originally. Various people suggested it, and we were puzzled by the suggestion, and then over time, especially after retirement, it seemed like not a bad way to keep occupied. On the grounds, people said we had a distinctive experience of the 60s, in part because we were young marrieds at a time in the making of the New Left, making a family, while most of our comrades either thought that was a bourgeois enterprise or weren't ready for that at the time. So our particular take on this era, both in living it and in writing about it, is to try to communicate how we made both history and life. Once we got started on the writing, about a decade ago, we realized that the story we had to tell had to begin with our parents. So we're both red diaper babies. How many don't know what that means yet?
Oh, yeah.
It means that, what it says here, a 60s era label for the sizable number of children of communists, socialists, other radicals. Our lives have been fundamentally shaped by that parentage, and we wanted to explore how. So this is a book that goes back a century with our mothers' births in very different circumstances and with their struggles before we were born. They were participants in a richly layered world. Their lives were embedded in institutions and practices shaped by the left. So we try to convey something about that. And then about the Red Scare of the 50s, which we lived through and try to deal with how that was for us. We discovered each other on the eve of the 60s, started married life at the very beginning of that decade, and experienced the political rebirth when black students started to openly defy segregation and small bands of college students started to protest the bombs. And so, and I won't go on because I wouldn't want to be standing as long as you've already been standing. There's a lot here about the 60s which people expect, but more than half the book, I think, is about the half century since then, which for most of that time we lived here. And so we tried, I think, to view the history of Santa Barbara as we experienced it through the lens of our family and community activism. And that might be useful for a lot of people to have some of that history, and some of the people who've already gotten their books signed are people who made more of that history than we have been able to do. So this is a book by two separate people, but with the shared experience of 59 years of marriage. And we each wrote our own stories separately and then tried to weave them together. And sometimes we talk about the same things, and that can be boring, according to a couple of readers. The idea is also that there are different perspectives, different and shared perspectives, and that is one way to read the book. By the way, we give in this introduction thanks to Harvey Molich, who is not here tonight, a part-time resident of this community, helped bring us here in the first place. But Harvey's a great book titler, and when we told him we were working on this, he said, "Oh, you've got to call the book Making History, Making Blintzes."
Wow.
Blintzes standing for the life and the Jewish tradition, which helped shape our identities and who we are. Mickey has written a lot about that in particular in the book, so you've got a little excerpt to share.
I don't know, it might be a little long, but
But you read very well.
I was brought up.
You stand up.
I was brought up in two seemingly contradictory contexts. A sense of alienation from the larger society and a profound sense of belonging to a vitally important and sustaining subgroup. I spoke only Yiddish until shortly before I entered kindergarten, at 5 years old. My parents were as different from the, quote, American family as one could imagine. Immigrant, Yiddish accented English speaking, working class, late middle age, Bolshevik style communists. We lived in a lower middle class neighborhood with a wave of wartime, that's World War II, folks. Prosperity had left us with a largish apartment and a boarder in one room to help pay the rent. Except for the accents, our neighbors and the parents of the kids I went to school and grew up with did not resemble my parents. I was taught that we were different from our neighbors. We had a higher consciousness. We were political. We took responsibility for improving the world around us. The prevailing society and culture, I was taught, were capitalistic and corrupt, racist, anti-Semitic, or of Jewish self-hating, lowbrow, anti-intellectual, and generally and profoundly evil. One could quickly be contaminated with this evil if one so much as picked up a New York Daily News or brought into the home a newspaper published by William Randolph Hearst. For a child to be brought up with this overwhelming sense of separation and alienation from the prevailing surround can lead to a strong sense of isolation and often a bitterness towards the world or to the parents, or both. It may be that some of the red diaper babies who now earn their bread among the neoconservatives, David Horowitz, are you listening? Are victims of that bitterness. In my case, however, I was provided with an alternative culture which offered a vibrant, creative, fulfilling life outside the rather blah mainstream, namely the world of left-wing Jewish secularism. From the age of 7, most kids in my neighborhood went to some sort of additional after-school program. The Jews to Hebrew school, the Catholics to catechism classes, and I don't think there were any WASPs. They weren't allowed. I went to the Chaim Zhitlowsky Shul 23 of the Jewish People's Fraternal Order, of the International Workers' Order, which was what was commonly known as a Communist Party front. There, every afternoon after school, I learned to read and write Yiddish and was taught biblical Jewish history from a secular perspective, emphasizing the prophets and their demands for social justice, Yiddish songs and dances, and English little songs on big subjects like "You Can Get Good Milk from a Brown-Skinned Cow," or "It Could Be a Wonderful World." After 4 years, I graduated to the Bronx Jewish Mittelschule, high school, one of 3 in New York at the time, where I continued my studies, adding modern Jewish history from a Marxist perspective, Yiddish literature, Hebrew as the modern language of Israel, and current events from a Jewish communist perspective. Mittelschule met on Friday evenings and all day Saturday. After Mittelschule, on Saturday nights, we students socialized like other New York teenagers, but in largest groups, not coupled off in dates. My closest friends were drawn from the kids at middle school, not from my neighborhood or high school. I even had different names, Miriam at school and Mickey at show and among my friends. And then they misspelled it in the book.
No.
All in all, the progressive secular Jewish movement provided for parents, children, and youth an almost total social, cultural, political milieu where they could feel completely unalienated as they immersed themselves in their own unique culture, cognizant always of the values it shared with the cultures of other oppressed minority groups, especially Negroes, the word in my day. This sense of belonging to a large community outside the standard, visible, conventional society was nourishing and sustaining for most of us. It reinforced a sense of specialness, encompassing a feeling of responsibility toward both the inside and outside communities. And I must share with you a story of my son Chuck, who when he went to nursery school at age 3, and I went to a teacher-parent conference, the teacher said, "It's wonderful having Chuck in the class because I know when any kid is in trouble that Chuck will come and tell me." I felt then that we had succeeded in parenthood.
Okay, good, thank you. And if there are questions people have, that might be something we could do for a little